Hello, boys and girls. Thanks for joining with me. We're near the end of Jotham's journey, Advent week 4, and we're in now part 6. Jotham, wake up! The voice was hissing in his ear, and Jotham swatted at it as if it was some annoying bug. Jotham, get up! I need your help! The voice whispered again, and finally Jotham opened his eyes and saw Hazra's face, illuminated by an oil lamp. Hazra hovering over him like a ghost in the blackness of the night. What? Jotham said, rubbing his eyes. I need your help, my friend. Some more travelers have arrived, a man and a woman. I tried to send them away, but the woman is about to have a child. I need your help to clean out the stable again so that they might sleep there. Jotham yawned widely, then climbed out from under the blanket and followed Hazra, carefully stepping around the sleeping guests. The night air outside the inn was cold, and Jotham gave a little shiver. He was glad he didn't have to sleep in a stable. He followed Hazra down the little dirt ramp that led to the stable under the inn, passing a rather tall man and a very pregnant woman sitting on a donkey. Once in the stable, Jotham and Hazra quickly shooed out most of the animals, then raked out the worst of the dirty hay. Jotham, Hazra said at last, we need some fresh hay for our guests to lie on. Behind the inn is a meadow, and on the far side of the meadow is a small roof covering a stack of hay. Take that cart, he said, pointing to a two-wheeled cart with handles, and bring back the freshest hay you can find. Jotham nodded, then left, pulling the little cart behind him. He smiled up at the pregnant woman as he passed her, wondering why she would want to sleep in a stable. Just as Hazra had said, the ground sloped downward behind the inn and leveled out onto a meadow. Jotham saw there were many shepherds camped here, their flocks sleeping under the moonlight. Jotham was just starting to form the thought that he should have searched out here for his family when a voice boomed out of the darkness. Who is that? The man roared. Who's there? Jotham was about to jump out of his skin and gave out a little yell. The man had frightened him so badly he couldn't get his throat to let any words out. I said, who's there? The voice demanded again. And now Jotham saw an oil lamp moving toward him, but he still couldn't speak. The man was now only a few feet away, and he moved the lamp close to Jotham's face. Then the voice, which had been so gruff, suddenly became soft and amazed. Jotham, he asked. Jotham of Jericho, is that you? The lamp moved away from Jotham's eyes then, and the face he saw before him sent lightning through his body. Eliakim, he yelled, and clamped his arms around his old friend's legs. Eliakim hugged the boy tightly. It's good to see you, he said. I was afraid we would never find you again. Jotham walked right past, do you know who? Joseph and Mary. Mary, the mother of the Messiah, and he didn't even know it. Do you know what? If we're not careful, sometimes we could pass right by the Messiah this Christmas and any Christmas without realizing it. What can we do to make sure that doesn't happen? Part 7. Just then another voice came out of the dark. Jotham? Jotham turned and saw Tabitha walking toward him. Tabitha, he yelled, and almost felt as if he was home again. Tabitha didn't say anything more, but turned and ran away. Jotham was confused by this, but turned back to Eliakim. Have you seen my father? He asked him. Sadly, no, little one, Eliakim answered. But then I do not know him, so I could very well pass him on the road and not even know it. Tabitha returned then, carrying in front of her a loaf of bread. I baked for you every day, she whispered, just like I promised. Tears came to Jotham's eyes, and he said, my mind wouldn't forget you either. Then Tabitha started talking about how much she had missed Jotham and about all the things that had happened since she last saw him. But Jotham only heard a few words, because behind her across the field, standing by a fire with his back to Jotham, was a man that looked terribly familiar. Jotham watched the man, silhouetted against the fire, for several minutes. Then right in the middle of Tabitha talking to him, he walked around her. Jotham, Tabitha said. Jotham, where are you going? But Jotham didn't answer. He started across the field, slowly at first, not taking his eyes off the man. Then he began to walk faster, and finally he broke into a run as he became more and more certain. Father, he yelled at last. Father! The man turned, and Jotham saw that it was indeed his father. A curious look crossed his father's face and then shook with joy. Jotham, he asked breathlessly. Jotham, he yelled and started running towards his son. Tears of joy began flowing down Jotham's cheeks as he realized that his long ordeal was finally over. In a moment he'd be in his father's arms and would never leave them again. But then when father and son were about 30 paces apart, a dark shadow swooped out from a stand of olive trees. It was Decca of Megiddo. In one smooth motion, Decca landed between Jotham and his father and drew his long, curved sword. In the same instant, two of his henchmen grabbed Jotham's father and quickly bound him with ropes on each wrist. Eliakim and his brother caught up with Jotham and skidded to a stop beside him. "Stay back," Decca roared at Jotham, "or your father will visit his ancestors a bit sooner than I had planned." "Stay back, Jotham," his father yelled. "My brother speaks no empty threats." "Your brother?" Jotham gasped. "Half-brother," Jotham's father, Asa, corrected. "Yes, now," Decca said as he threatened Asa's neck with the point of his sword. "That does seem to be a problem, doesn't it?" "What do you want, Decca?" Jotham's father spat out the words. "Only what is rightfully mine. My birthright, the flocks and tents and camels of our father." "Rightfully yours?" Asa said in disbelief. "Of all our brothers, you're the last one who should receive our father's inheritance." Then he turned to Jotham and explained, "Decca killed our father when we were but boys." "The man beat me and denied me food," Decca screamed. "He did no such thing," Jotham's father answered. "He was the kindest and most gentle father a boy could have. You've been telling that lie so long, you believe it." Decca instantly calmed and drew his sword back, testing its edge with his thumb. "Perhaps," he said calmly, "but the fact remains that I am the firstborn of Joseph, and I deserve to have his wealth." "Yes, you are the firstborn of his first wife, and I am the firstborn of his second wife," Asa said slowly. "But my mother bore me long before yours bore you, and the law clearly gives me our father's inheritance." Decca sighed, "Which is why, brother, I must now kill you. And then I will kill all my other half-brothers." He moved closer to Asa and put the sword at his throat once more, "including the youngest, who even now waits in a stable up in Bethlehem." Asa shook his head slowly. "Why, Decca? What did anyone ever do to you to fill you with such hate?" "That's simple," Decca whispered. The stench of his breath made Jotham's father gag. "Our father loved you and your mother more than he loved me and my mother." "That's a lie, Decca," Asa said. "Our father showed your mother every bit of love, but she rewarded him with jealousy." Decca stared at Asa for a moment, and Jotham felt as if his uncle were truly the bad man himself. "I should have killed you when I killed our father," Decca said, and he took a long step back and raised his sword over his head. "Goodbye, brother." "No!" Jotham screamed, but he was helpless to stop his uncle. Decca took one last look at Jotham and grinned, his black-toothed, rotting grin. Then he started to swing the sword at Asa. And that's when the cry went up from the woods. It was a high-pitched wail that sounded like a squawk of a peacock. Everyone turned and looked. A moment later, a blurry figure sprang from the woods, did 3 cartwheels, and landed right in front of Decca. "Nathan!" Jotham yelled with a grin. "Nathan!" Nathan tweaked Decca on the nose. "Are you being a naughty boy again?" he asked like a parent. Decca roared in anger and swung his sword at Nathan, but Nathan, once again acting the part of the fool, dropped below the blade and did a backflip, landing on the ground 10 feet away as if he were lounging on his bedroll. "Temper, temper," Nathan chided Decca. And Decca screamed again and went after Nathan, but Nathan was too fast. He spun around twice, then dove between the legs of one of his henchmen. "I'll kill you both!" Decca roared and started after Nathan. But once again, Nathan jumped up, spun and sprang, this time ending up behind one of the henchmen. Then Nathan did another backflip in such a way that he ended up standing just inches in front of Decca. The shocked Decca just stared at him with wide eyes. "Now, now," Nathan said, "we mustn't play with big knives." And with that, Nathan plucked the sword right out of Decca's hand. With 3 more flips, he ended up back at the edge of the woods, the weaponless Decca looking down at his hands in disbelief. Jotham and Eliakim's clan cheered and laughed, then started towards Decca and his henchmen. The henchmen grew scared and almost dropped the ropes that held Asa. But then Jotham watched in horror as a noose on one of the ends of the rope came flying out of the woods and dropped around Nathan's neck. With a laugh and a cackle, Decca's mother rode out of the woods on the donkey she had stolen from Jotham. She was holding the rope and pulling it tight. Nathan dropped the sword and grabbed the rope around his neck, choking. In a flash, Decca swooped up the sword and threatened Asa's neck with it once more. "Stay back, all of you," he yelled, and Jotham and his group stopped short. "Very well then," Decca hissed, looking at Nathan. "I shall have one more head to decorate my tent." He turned back to Jotham and said, "Wait right there, boy. You're going to be next." With that, he raised his sword once again, and Jotham screamed. Nathan pulled the rope away from his throat just enough to get a breath. Looking at Jotham, he yelled, "David!" Jotham was so mixed up and scared that he felt as if his head was full of fog. Dazed, he looked at Nathan, not understanding what his friend was yelling. "David!" Nathan yelled again. Suddenly the fog disappeared. In one smooth motion, Jotham swept up a stone off the ground and slid his sling out of his belt. Even as he raised his sling over his head, he was putting the stone in its leather pouch. With 3 mighty turns of his arm, Jotham spun the sling overhead, then looking straight at Decca, he let his sling go. Decca was in his backswing now, the hate and anger of a lifetime going into this one swing of his sword. As he tried to put all his might into this one moment, he swung the sword behind him, turning away from Asa, and in that moment his eyes grew wide and the blood drained from his face as he saw hurling toward his forehead the rock that Jotham had just slung at him. A moment later, the stone hit Decca between the eyes, and Decca dropped dead. For several seconds, everything was absolutely silent. Everyone stared at the body of Decca in disbelief. Then Decca's mother shrieked and jumped off the donkey and ran into the woods. Seeing Eliakim and his clan moving toward them, the henchmen dropped the ropes that held Jotham's dad and followed Decca's mother. Nathan yelled, pulled the rope from his neck, and took off after the henchmen. Finally, seeing a clear path, Jotham numbly stumbled towards his father. "Oh, Jotham, Jotham, Jotham," his father cried, hugging his son tightly. "We thought you were dead. I'm so sorry." Jotham cried, and his heart felt as if it would explode with joy. "I am the one who is so sorry, Father. I am so sorry. I will never disobey you again." After several moments of enjoying the feel of his father's arms around him, Jotham slowly pulled away and turned to where the body of Decca lay. He knelt beside it and bowed his head. "Jehovah Lord, forgive me for what I have had to do this day," he prayed, echoing the words of Caleb. "Judge this man as you will, and judge me in the light of your mercy." And everyone there said, "Selah," at the end of that prayer, and Jotham felt the hot sting of tears rolling down his cheeks. "Jotham!" The scream came from the far side of the camp, and Jotham looked up. It was his mother, being led by Tabitha. "Jotham!" she screamed again. She ran the dozen yards between them, and he leaped into her arms. "Oh, Jotham, my dear child," she cried. "I thought I had lost you." Suddenly the whole meadow was full of people. Jotham's brothers were there, hugging and patting him on the back. His sisters came out, and all of Eliakim's family. Everyone gathered around Jotham and rejoiced. For a long time, Jotham's family and friends stood around hugging and marveling that the one they thought they'd lost was still alive. They laughed and cried until they couldn't laugh or cry anymore. And it was exactly at the moment when the family had laughed and cried until they couldn't anymore that the bright, bright light, brighter than any light Jordan had ever seen, suddenly appeared directly over their heads.